Good afternoon, and welcome to Miami University's Redhawk Talks. Give yourselves a hand for being here. Okay, so what is Redhawk Talks? Well, it's not a conference nor a research symposium. Redhawk Talks is an opportunity to showcase the incredible research of our graduate students at Miami University. So we have 12 fabulous speakers for you today, and you are in for a treat. Who am I? I'm Shakita Hughes. I'm your host. So whenever you see me standing, that means that you're free to roam around the cabin. When I'm off the stage, that means our speakers are up. You're no longer free to roam around the cabin. We will give you a 10-minute break so that you can get snacks, go to the restroom, have a drink of water, stretch your legs, shake peanut butter off of your hands, something like that. And then we will start again. Is that okay? All right, so because we want our viewing audience to know how excited you are to be here, let's give a round of applause for Redhawk Talks. Fabulous, fabulous. We have our first speaker for today will be Catherine Stallhut. This time of year is a great time of year for you to get your hands dirty, doing your gardens and playing in the sand. But Catherine has more insight about why it is important for us to play with our dirt, or something like that. Catherine Stallhut, give her a hand.
That was just a preview of what we're about to talk about. Okay, so y'all have already heard some of my talk. Okay, so starting over. In 1934, a series of great dust storms spread across the Great Plains in what was one of the largest ecological disasters in American history. Thousands of people died from starvation and dust inhalation, and millions of environmental refugees fled the Great Plains to either coast. 50 years before the Dust Bowl, prairies existed on the land of the Great Plains, and they were adapted to the arid conditions. However, during the land grabs of the late 19th and early 20th century, these prairies were plowed under and replaced with family farms and cattle operations. Poor farming practices and overgrazing, along with record drought, led the soil to be turned into dust, which was whipped across the continent. In recognition of the extreme harm that had been done to the soils during this time, Franklin D. Roosevelt sent a letter to state governors urging them to take soil conservation seriously, saying, "The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." And if you haven't already, the exit's there, because we're about to talk more about soil. Luckily, we won't be talking about dirt, because dirt is really boring. This is just eroded rock particles that exist below our feet. And this is what you might track into your house, or what might end up on your car when you've driven down a dusty country road. Today we're going to be talking about soil. And soil does contain dirt, but it also contains so much more. The most obvious components are the plants and animals that live within the soil, and you probably know what those look like. But what you might not see are the vast array of microbes that live below ground that create soil and make it what it is. So one of my favorite smells in the world is the smell of rain. But that smell is actually created by a cyanobacteria that lives in soil. It produces a compound called geosmin, and when the rain falls on the soil, the geosmin is released into the air, and that's actually the smell that we associate with rain. There are other really cool microbes that live in the soil too. In fact, one of the most important is rhizobia. Rhizobia takes nitrogen from the air and fixes it into a form that plants are able to take up. This is something that farmers pay millions of dollars each year for in synthetic fertilizers, and it's something our soil gives us for free. Now, my favorite component of soils are the fungi. And almost 90% of fungal species live in soil. The fungi I study are mycorrhizal fungi. Myco for fungus and rhiza for root. These fungi actually live within the roots themselves and spread their hyphae out in the soil, much in the same way plant roots do. Except the hyphae is much, much finer than plant roots, which makes them much more effective at foraging. Plants will actually come and feed these fungi. And so the fungi will provide nutrients back to the plant. This is such a lucrative strategy for plants that 80% of plant species utilize mycorrhizal fungi to collect at least some of their nutrients. In fact, mycorrhizal fungi are believed to be the reasons that plants even emerged onto land in the first place 400 million years ago. Now, this is the background of the soils that we have in the Midwest, and this is what's created such a strong agricultural community here and why we're considered the breadbasket. But our agricultural practices in the Midwest have led to the loss of 60 billion tons of soil since we started farming this region in the 1860s. To put that into perspective, we are talking about 2 pounds of soil per square meter per year that is lost in the Midwest. Not only are we losing soil, but we're also losing the carbon that is stored in that soil. In the same time frame, we've lost 4 billion tons of carbon that was initially stored in the soil. So you might be wondering now, how do we fix this? Because this sounds really dramatically bad. Well, farmers have already started using some soil preservation practices to prevent the erosion of soils. And these are things like cover cropping and no-till. Cover cropping is the practice of planting something else on your soil in between the major growing periods. So a farmer that may grow corn would plant clover during the winter. No-till is the practice of not messing with the soil in between your growing seasons, so your soil remains intact. Both of these allow the soil to remain its structure and actually prevent erosion later on. But it also allows soil organic matter to build up in that soil. And that's what ends up making the soil more fertile and also increases water drainage and water retention. Now, this is only one step, because if we look at these systems, they're primarily from annual crop species. Now, if we take a look at our prairies, most of the prairie plants are actually perennials, meaning they come back year after year, and they're actually alive in the soil during the winter. So scientists have actually taken this message and tried to create an agricultural ecosystem that mimics more of the prairies. This is an example of annual wheat and perennial wheatgrass that's currently in development. Annual wheat's typically planted in the fall and will be harvested in early summer. So you can see actually the progression of what this looks like over the growing season on the left of these 4 boxes. Perennial wheat, on the other hand, reaches maturity after a year. And by that point, the roots have grown more than 2 meters into the soil, dramatically outpacing the size that annual wheat will ever become. But you get to harvest this year after year, and you don't have to replant it. What this deep root system does is it creates a store of carbon, reaffirming the sink in the soil of carbon. But it also creates an environment for microbes to actively live and to provide those benefits that we know we can get from soil. Now, we as scientists can continue to make these dramatic changes to our these dramatic findings to our agricultural systems, but we are never going to see widespread adoption until we change the policies that are currently in place in the agricultural ecosystems. Currently, most small American farmers do not make a profit year after year. And these are the farmers that would be most likely to adopt these sustainable practices. Not only that, but if they do find funding, the investment that it takes to create these regenerative systems is not reflected in the value of the land itself. Not only that, too, but if they're growing a specialty crop, they might be missing out on commodity crop pricing that the federal government subsidizes. So without changing how we operate in our federal government as far as how we provide subsidies to farmers, we might never actually see the changes of sustainable and regenerative farming. And I want to just talk about how important these changes are. We need to produce 60% more food by 2050 to feed the 10 billion people who will be on this planet. We already use half of our land, our habitable land, for food systems currently. So it's not feasible for us to extend that any further. So we need to be able to produce more food on less land. We also need to dramatically decrease our carbon footprint. And agriculture is a huge contributor to the carbon that's released every year. So as we start thinking about how we address these problems that we'll be facing in the next decade, we need to really think about how we need to change our agricultural systems. And that will end up starting from the ground up. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I learned that there's a new fragrance. So when you go in the grocery stores and you see fresh rain, that really is geosmin, right? So we have a new fragrance, and we are learning from the land. The land is teaching us so much about life. The land needs a rest. And as we talk about nature speaking to us, Benjamin Akande is going to come and provide to us the relationship between zebrafish and our hearts. Let's give him a hand.
In chaos lies opportunity. Today I'm going to share with you a story where fake news created purpose. Purpose in heart. My story started as a 15-year-old boy growing up in Ghana, West Africa, and glued to the evening news channel one fateful night, where the news reporter passionately reports to crowdfund to surgically save a life of an 8-year-old girl diagnosed with a hole in heart condition. In my naive teenage mind, this was fake news and gave it no attention. Fast forward, I go to college and I develop a deep inquisitiveness on how human organs are formed. It first started by researching human limbs development. That's the hands and the legs. And today, I focus on heart development. You may say, that's strange, or he became a believer. I prefer to be described by the latter. The human heart is a very complex organ, with 4 chambers and its corresponding valves. Blood moves into the heart through 2 major veins called the pulmonary vein and the vena cava. Blood then navigates through the various chambers of the heart, which are under the influence of respective valves, then eventually exits the heart through the pulmonary artery and the aorta. This only happens when the heart is properly formed. However, in some instances, the heart is improperly formed, resulting in leaky valves, hole in heart, and defective vessels. Heart malformation comes in different forms and is collectively known in the medical world as congenital heart defect, which contributes to 30% of the infantile mortalities annually, and currently can be repaired by surgery. The current surgical repair approach has saved more lives than I myself can even number. However, it is flagged by the aftermath of adverse effect, constant medical intervention, and in some cases, restraint on certain physical engagements. At this point, I want to advise the audience that I'm going to show you a photo that contains some disturbing features, so please be advised. This is a photo of a 3-month-old baby who had just been subjected to an open heart surgery to repair his heart. I just want you to think about the ordeal this baby and the family had to endure during this phase. And mind you, this baby will need to have this scar for the rest of his life. This and many other types triggered conversation within the scientific space to better understand the root cause of this condition and hopefully come up with a better alternative. And after long hours of working, scientists discovered zebrafish as a powerful tool because the heart development in humans is very, very similar to that of zebrafish. And again, zebrafish have a transparent skin that allows us to observe the development of the heart in real time. So no need for surgeries. That's good news. So the goal here is simple. It's to use zebrafish to understand and define the root cause of congenital heart defect. And my main purpose is to use zebrafish to understand at the molecular and cellular level how a unique structure of the heart called the outflow tract develops. To provide some perspective, the zebrafish heart, as shown here, receives blood at a junction known as the venous flow at the inflow tract region, which is marked as IFT. Blood then moves into the atrium under the influence of a valve known as the atrioventricular canal. The opening of this canal moves blood into the ventricle, then eventually exits the heart at the atrial pole via the outflow tract. You could see here, the zebrafish heart is very, very different from humans. Very, very simple, but the process is still the same. If you take a deep dive into the composition of the outflow tract, it consists of myocardial cells, that are cardiac muscle cells, endocardial cells, which are cardiac lining cells, and smooth muscles that provide elasticity to the outflow tract. In a much more complex human heart system, just as you and I have it, the outflow tract develops into the aorta and the pulmonary artery. These are major vessels that transport blood away from the heart. So, if you have a defective outflow tract, blood is remaining in the heart, depriving other organs of the blood they need to perform their functions. So this is very, very important. So this is what I did. I acquired 2 groups of fish, one in the disease state and one as a control group. And my disease fish, I call them pendulum, or pen for short, with my control as sibling. At a time point of 72 hours post-fertilization, where outflow tract formation is evident. And you could see here that in the SIB group, as shown in panel A, there is an intact smooth muscle cell structure as stained in green and pointed by the arrow, with a normal ventricular cell structure as stained in red. However, in the pen group, we encounter an opposing narrative, where approximately 30% have completely lost their smooth muscle cell structure, as shown in panel B, with the other 70 having a reduced smooth muscle structure, as shown in panel C. You may wonder, what is then happening to the myocardium and endocardial cell population? We then dived into that, and we could see an intact myocardial population in both groups, with an excessive endocardial population in the pendulum group. This then also generated a lot of conversation. What probably is wrong? Then we figured, congenital heart defect is genetically influenced. So why don't us do the next best thing? We acquire genetic information from these fish, build a genetic database, and spend long hours screening for mutations that could contribute to these defects. And after long hours and sleepless night and a lot of coffee, I identified 11 genes. I was so happy. And the day of discovery, when I told my PI this news, she was so elated. At least we figured something out. Then it dawned on us, genes do not live in isolation. They interact. So, to better understand what is going on, we need to dive deeper into the gene interactions and networks so that we can know how these mutations directly or indirectly affect our interactions. Though the path ahead may be extremely long, which I can tell you for a fact is going to be very long, but our perseverance is driven by a singular purpose, which is to ultimately unravel the mysteries of congenital heart defect with the hope of paving way for better therapeutics. It is this purpose in heart that fuels my scientific endeavor to improve lives and bring renewed hope to families affected by this condition. This is our story, and this is the purpose in heart. Thank you.
Let's thank Benjamin again. As we continue with this topic on hearts, our next speaker, Zachary Marsh, will address the heart of a matter, a particular matter, in the power of emotion. Zachary believes that something as simple as a conversation can help change our perspective and intervention as we address HIV prevention and quality of life. Our next speaker, Zachary T. Marsh.
When I started in Miami in fall of 2019, I had no direction of where I wanted to go with my life. I started as a microbiology major. The COVID-19 pandemic came months later, and the classes got really rough, the labs got really rough, got to the point that I can't do this anymore. Around the time the COVID-19 pandemic started, that's when I discovered public health education. Public health education spoke to me because I'd be able to help communities impacted by issues, and I got to focus on diseases, which I went to for microbiology, but microbiology focused more on the mechanisms of actions of microbes. Being able to help people with these diseases interested me even more. One of the diseases that spoke to me is HIV. As a gay man myself, seeing how queer men are dehumanized, stigmatized, and marginalized for having HIV, and also have those same issues because they are queer, spoke to me, and it made me want to help bring change to how we perceive queerness and how we perceive HIV. The CDC found in the United States that the highest rates of new HIV cases in this country are those 13 to 24, 25 to 34, Black African American, and men who have sex with men, or MSM. But those are not mutually exclusive. Imagine the stories a 25-year-old gay Black man would have. They would be stigmatized by racism, by homophobia, for having HIV, and there are many other institutional structures that would marginalize a person like him. The CDC also found that 2/3 of new HIV cases, or what they call an epidemiology incidence, are MSM in this country. So a little history about the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the United States. It started around the early 1980s. Doctors have noticed an increase in cases in major cities of conditions such as Kaposi's sarcoma and pneumocystis pneumonia. Those cases, they soon realized that this is because of immunodeficiency. They started calling this trend gay-related immune deficiency because the most common groups they saw this in were gay men and injectable drug users. Obviously, that stigmatizes gay people from the get-go. Later on, as a response to this epidemic, bathhouses in major cities such as New York City and San Francisco were closed. This also stigmatizes gay people. One of my participants at a focus group I'll talk about later mentioned that it reflects the notion that the only way they thought to combat HIV was for gay men to not have sex, stigmatizing of the get-go. Later on, we see more protests and more people become AIDS activists. They protested governmental inaction in response to the epidemic, and these protesters included gay men, other queer men, and people with HIV or AIDS. Also, we have the Lesbian Blood Sisters, who were an important group in LGBT culture in the 80s and 90s, and they nursed gay men dying of AIDS. Several celebrities you may have heard of have died of AIDS-related complications. These are including, but not limited to, popular artist Keith Haring, Queen frontman Freddie Mercury, Ryan White, who was a teenager who got AIDS from a blood transfusion, and as a result of that, he faced stigmatization and discrimination in his school and in his community, and became a national news story. He would later die of AIDS. Eazy-E, who was a member of the hip-hop collective NWA. Tennis player Arthur Ashe also is another example you definitely have heard of. Several studies have been done, including a study in 2015 by Oldenburg and colleagues, and a study in 2019 by Baldessari and colleagues. They found that MSM are less likely to have open discussions with their healthcare providers on HIV and STIs in general. This is very problematic because healthcare providers are the ones who prescribe treatment. They prescribe prevention. Prevention being pre-exposure prophylaxis. There's also post-exposure prophylaxis if you get exposed to HIV. And then there's also antiretroviral therapy, or ART. ART is what you take when you have HIV to reduce the viral load. with the goal of being untransmissible, because then you can continue sexual contact. The UNAIDS has a goal of ending the HIV/AIDS pandemic by 2030. But if we're not having these discussions in our communities with our healthcare providers, then how in the world are we going to address ending this pandemic effectively? To investigate this problem, my research assistant and I conducted a focus group. We found 4 people in the Midwest, aged 18 to 35, and we had a focus group with them through Zoom. Here is a little table of some of their characteristics. So we need to ask, how can engaging in dialogue help break HIV stigma and reduce cases? And that was what we'll be focused on through discussion and dialogue and catharsis. One of my participants, Jay, a 19-year-old, he reflected on a scenario through a case study approach of the focus group. And in that case study, an individual took PrEP, got off of it, and got HIV through sexual contact when he was off of it. He shared, and I quote, "If we were to treat any other person who had a disease like that, it would be considered negative or messed up. This reflects the stigma that is present in our society. We have been dehumanizing people with HIV to the point that we don't see them as human. Friends and family are often who we go to first, but all are not supportive." In another scenario from the focus group, one of my participants, C, reflected on a scenario where a person in the scenario did not feel supported by their friends. They felt judged, they felt stigmatized. In response, he shared that ultimately he would have to leave his friends for the benefit of his mental health and wellness. Thankfully, I have my older brother. My older brother is a gay man in his late 20s. We have engaged in text discussions on pre-exposure prophylaxis, HIV prevention, and treatment. Given his experiences as a gay man and the fact that he is 5 years older than me, a little over 5 years older than me, I have been able to feel more comfortable discussing with my healthcare provider to start discussions about PrEP when the moment is right. And I thank him for that, because even without just my research, I feel like I would not have been able to do this. Healthcare providers are ultimately who we want to have these discussions with, but obviously for several reasons, people feel afraid to discuss medication with their healthcare provider. That's why I say having discussions with your friends and family, the most accessible members of your community, is how you practice for these discussions with your healthcare provider. They ultimately get you more comfortable having these discussions, and that is through catharsis. Catharsis can essentially be thought of as the releasing of emotions through talking. Being able to talk about things you've held in, things that have been suppressed, allow you to release the feelings of that, and it feels very gratifying. Have you ever told something you've been holding in for so long, and you finally tell someone, you reveal it, and it's felt so great? That is catharsis. Being able to feel that gratifying feeling can further cause you to have further discussions. And that's why I say discussion and dialogue and catharsis are systemic. Systems have parts where each part benefits each other, and without that part, the system would not work. Discussion and dialogue are systemic. You need initial discussion and dialogue to be able to feel that gratifying feeling from catharsis. And then you need catharsis to be able to engage in further discussion and dialogue. The cycle continues and continues and continues. The more of these we go through, the more we can start addressing HIV/AIDS and ending the pandemic by 2030. In conclusion, if we want to end the HIV/AIDS pandemic worldwide by 2030, not just among MSM, but in all communities, we need to talk more about the institutional, systematic structures that cause increases in HIV in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach, for reminding us of the power of conversation. Power of conversation. Our next speaker is Abubakar Bala, and he wants to address some of the challenges that face institutions of higher education. We have to question our resilience in the midst of volatile and uncertain times, such as pandemics. Our next speaker, please give him a hand. Abubakar Bala.
The declaration of COVID as a pandemic in March 2020 has challenged and continued to shape the way we do things up to this moment. It questioned not only our claim of advancement in medicine, but also our readiness to confront issues, problems, and challenges that the future is yet to reveal. To fight the COVID pandemic then, some measures were recommended, including closing of schools, which disrupted academic normalcy beyond imagination. In fact, the New York Times described those school closures, which forced more than 50 million learners out of classrooms and caused significant learning losses among students, as the most damaging disruption in the history of American education. Furthermore, the United Nations report in the year 2020 revealed how 99% of students in low and middle income countries and a total of 94% of students globally lost about 35% of a normal academic year's worth of learning. Those were huge losses that no country was willing to accept. In the United States, for instance, Congress sent a total of $190 billion in aid to schools, with the intention that 20% of that fund must be used to reverse those learning setbacks. Arguably, our world is safer now than it was at the beginning of the pandemic. However, our leaders' inability to agree on issues such as the world peace, climate change, food security, poverty eradication, renewable energy, and the constant threat of wars means that the possibility of witnessing another disruption of academic normalcy or international traveling is a matter of when, not if. And this should be of serious concern to all of us. So, how can we prevent student lost learning in event of any disruption of normalcy in this volatile and highly unpredictable world that we all live in? Well, I have some proposals. One, landing rights. In aviation, landing rights is a permit which allows foreign airlines to land both scheduled and unscheduled flights in any airport other than just international ones. Similar to that, therefore, I propose that we have educational landing right for students. This is necessary because in a study that covered 180 countries by UNICEF, about 25 million students were found to be at risk of not returning to their schools due to learning and financial losses incurred during the pandemic. Secondly, just last December, a friend traveled home to renew his visa. Unfortunately, he was delayed for months in what the embassy called administrative processings. Now, imagine how consoling it would have been for those students had educational landing rights, which will allow students to join any university in event of any disruption to continue their education was already in place. Two, decentralized academic calendar. The practice of charging higher amounts by airlines and other service providers during back-to-school period for no reason other than increase in demand is putting lots of pressure on parents, students, and faculty's limited resources. For example, when I first arrived Oxford in August and went to a hotel, a room was $375 per night. When I asked why was it that expensive, the answer was simple. This is a move-in week and we are 75% full to capacity. Additionally, a PhD student from Ghana was unable to join his cohort last year when the ticket price skyrocketed more than 4 times between March, when he got the admission, and August, when he and other students were to resume school. Now, think of a decentralized academic calendar where universities begin their session in different months of the year. That will significantly reduce the pressure and ensure that students get to their various schools at ease and thereby preventing learning losses. 3, all year round schooling. According to George Evans, and of course many scholars, every student can learn, just not on the same day or in the same way. Therefore, since both fall and spring semesters are 16 weeks of instructions each, imagine if schools were all year round, where students could join at any month of the year to register for and complete 16 weeks of instructions and have that count toward graduation as either fall or spring semester by their university. That will open up more opportunities for students of all backgrounds, especially those with financial needs, to take up full-time jobs, raise money, and return to school at any given month without the need to wait until August to register for fall or January to begin the spring semester. I know that approving educational learning rights, changing the academic calendar, and implementing all year-round schooling could be difficult and challenging. However, let's not forget, we have not seen the end of disruption of academic normalcy of epic proportions. Therefore, just as we learn to live with COVID, it's time we come up with ways of preventing student lost learning in event of any disruptions. Thank you.
Let's give him another hand. As I was listening to the all year-round schooling, I'm a mom that raised 4 kids. I would have really loved that because during the summer we could have saved so much money on our grocery bill. Thank you so much, Abu Bakar. How can something so small provide information to us that would be life-changing? Evelyn Orafako, she's going to help me say that right. Help me. Okarafo, thank you. Evelyn Okarafo is going to talk to us about something small that can change something big. Are you ready? Let's give her a hand.
I remember that night. I remember that night 10 years ago when I lost my mom. The very day the doctor certified her healthy and strong enough to go home with us. It was the worst day of my life and I was very devastated. But in my trauma, I decided to research the reason why people die, even after being certified healthy and strong to go home or being discharged from the hospital. And that was when it dawned on me that some diseases that you and I have heard about are actually incurable. Instead of being cured, medicine will just have you manage them for the rest of your life. And this is because either the root cause is yet unknown or not fully understood. At that point, I promised myself that I was going to be involved in some kind of drug discovery, whether secondary or primary. And my coming to the US for my PhD was another opportunity for me to explore my passion. Some common diseases that you and I have heard about, like diabetes, cancer, COVID-19, heart diseases, and several others, have been linked to membrane proteins. A class of proteins that exist alongside phospholipids in the cell membrane, which is present in everyone seated here in this room. Now, let's take a quick dive back to our elementary biology, where we were taught that the cell is the central unit of life, and that human beings are made up of trillions of cells in them. And as you can see on the screen, the cell makes up the tissue, which makes up the organ that makes up you, a human being. In case you still don't get it, now, imagine the cell like your house, your beautiful house, that has a wall that shields it from its environment. And imagine that wall as a cell membrane, which shields the cell from its environment. And then, while you picture your house, I know your house has windows and doors that allow you go out, come in, get groceries, and then shut your door against anyone you don't want. Now, imagine those doors and windows as our membrane proteins, because they act as transporters that helps the passage in and out of the cell of molecules and ions like glucose, calcium, potassium, and others. And then there's a part of the wall that gives it its structure and rigidity. Think about that like our phospholipids. Now, I have a big question for you to think about. What do you think is going to happen to your house if your windows and your doors are distorted? Same question you think about. What happens to the human and the cell if something goes wrong with these membrane proteins? Membrane proteins also act as enzymes, as they help to catalyze several chemical reactions in the body. And this class of proteins are important drug targets. That is why they account for 60% of FDA-approved drugs. But something is wrong again, because just 2% of their structures are represented in the Protein Data Bank, a database where scientists are allowed to go search out the structure and properties of proteins while trying to study them further. And I know you'll be thinking in your head, why? Because these proteins are so important. Why? The reason is because outside of their native environment, it is very challenging to study this class of proteins. Scientists have tried over the years to be able to create an environment that suits these proteins for us to be able to study them. From the onset of using detergents to this era where we use polymers like styrene malic acid, a polymer that has been used to fix the structure of membrane proteins through cryo-EM and NMR. In case you still don't get it, let me explain further how this environment works. Imagine if everyone in this room is given a task to study how a catfish moves or how a catfish behaves. And you will agree with me that a catfish exists in a big water body, right? And we can't all go to that big water body to study that catfish. So what do? To achieve our goal, we have to create an artificial pond or a lake somewhere close by where we have access to our fish, and where our fish will also be comfortable while we study the movement and the behavior of that fish. Now, this new environment we create for our fish is what styrene malic acid and its derivatives or other polymers does for our membrane proteins. My lab, which is Dr. Lorigan's lab, is focused on conducting biophysical and structural studies of these membrane proteins. And my research is basically on improving the application of styrene malic acid, its derivatives, and other polymers, in the sense that we get the right polymer, the right charges, the right size, and the right ratio needed to keep our membrane proteins happy. And because I mentioned earlier that these membrane proteins exist alongside phospholipids, I am also involved in optimizing the composition of phospholipids needed to study our membrane proteins. Because understanding each membrane protein function and structure totally depends on having the right polymer and having the right phospholipids to create a favorable environment for our membrane protein. We got you covered. I have great news for all of us. Because we're not just doing this work for us, we're creating a bigger tool for researchers and drug discoverers as they have the opportunity to develop more drugs that you and I need to be healthier and to live longer. Because medicine is something universal and is very indispensable. But we can only cure what we truly understand. Thank you.
Let's give Evelyn another hand. We appreciated that talk. To let us know something so small as our protein membranes hold the key to healthy and life and quality of living. Our next speaker is Kelsey Nolan. Kelsey is going to show us a novel approach to capturing our memories. Let's give her a hand.
Thank you all for being here. So, Department of Art. I'm a photographer, but I actually prefer to make my work without a camera. And I know when you first hear photography, no camera, maybe that raises some alarm bells, you're a little confused, but don't worry, I'm going to walk you through what that means and how I got here. So I actually trace my journey back to a moment that I had with a bird. It was the COVID year, which we've heard about, and I was living at home with my family on our family farm. And I kept noticing this really bright white bird that was flying around, and when I investigated, I realized that it was actually a red-tailed hawk. But it had a genetic mutation that caused all of its feathers to be bright white. And I thought, man, I have to get a photograph of that bird. So I spent months walking every day. I would put my camera in the car and drive up and down the valley 2 or 3 times a day. If I went out for errands, I took my camera with me. I really wanted to figure out, where does this bird live? When does it like to hunt? I just had to have my camera with me at all times, just in case I would see it. And then one day, after months of chaotic, obsessive pursuing of this bird, I thought, okay, personal ambition, I have to put it to the side. I just want to walk in this beautiful landscape on this beautiful place, be present in the moment, and enjoy my environment. And as you've maybe guessed, the one time that I did not take my camera, that bird flew right out in front of me. You know those moments where they say, oh, if I reached out, I could have touched it. It really felt that close. I was pretty devastated at first, and I thought, how could I have left my camera? What a stupid choice. But then by the time I got to the end of that walk, I actually realized the camera would have just been in the way. And then actually all the other times that I'd gone out with my camera, when I'd see the bird, it would be a split second before, boom. And there was a block in front of me, a barrier between me and the experience, between me and the bird. So I wasn't really being in that moment the same way. And this caused a huge crisis for me, and I thought, do I even want to make photographs right before I was going to go to grad school for photography? So let that sink in. And this uneasiness, it kind of stuck with me my first couple of years, and I was really questioning the roots of the medium, asking, what is a photograph? Is there something out there that makes sense for me that can get me past this conflict? And when you break down the word photograph, photo means light, and graph means to record. So there's actually no mention of a camera or a specific process or a certain material. You just need light and a light-sensitive surface. So I took that new simplified definition and I ran with it. I knew that I had traditional black and white darkroom printing materials and that photo paper would capture light, and I had light in abundance. So I really got into this process called contact printing, where you start with a base layer, and for me this was that light-sensitive paper, and then you put an object in direct contact with it. You expose it to light, add the photochemicals that create the blacks, the grays, the whites, the different tones, and that's how you get your image. So I experimented with that, and it was really amazing for me because it changed what I expected a photograph could look like. So in this slide, if I told you that I was going to show you a photograph of hay, this might be something that you would imagine seeing. But with that cameraless contact printing that I mentioned, now a photograph of hay could instead look like this. And if I just took that material out into the sun instead of exposing it to the fluorescence inside, hay could look like this. Now, when we talk about photography, we often talk about memory, and you heard that in my intro. And a lot of times when we're thinking about memory, we're thinking about, oh, if I take this photograph, I can capture this moment, I can preserve it. And we think about that visual connection, that it's going to be a reminder of what happened. And when I'm making a photograph like this, I'm actually also thinking about memory, but embodied memory. So when I process these photographs, I'm actually physically engaging through the whole process with my senses. Every piece of material that I put down for that contact print, it has to pass through my hands. I'm feeling the different textures and shapes that are going onto the canvas, if you will. I'm also, as you can see, sometimes walking across and feeling the pressure from the different shapes up against the bottom of my feet. And also, I'm hearing it crack and break. In this case, it was dry hay. There's this crinkling sound. And then when I take it into the wash bath at the end of the process, I'm hearing the water run for 40 minutes. And I'm also smelling things. I smell that hay, and I smell the photochemistry as I'm pouring it, and it's starting to bake in the sun. And what's also important about these process images that I noticed as I was reflecting on them, there's also no camera blocking my vision. So not only am I engaging with these other senses, but I'm fully engaged with my vision the entire time. So the process becomes just as important as the experience of the final print. I want to return to that bird that I told you about. I did get some camera photographs of it. I told you I was out for months, so I did get 1 or 2 images, more like 1,000. But to be quite honest with you, I don't really ever look at this. And to make this presentation, I had to go into my archive of old memory cards and file through them and find where the original files were, because I don't have it in any kind of special place. I don't pull it out and look at it because I've already got it in there already. Now, maybe the detail of the beak isn't as sharp and I can't see all the little pieces of its feathers, but I remember how I froze when it flew out in front of me. My heart was pounding. I felt like if I even breathe, this is going to be over. It's going to be not real. And I remember just a blaze of white against a clear winter sky. And I don't want any of you to go away from this talk thinking, oh, cameras are bad. I mean, for those of you who don't know, Oxford was in the path of the total eclipse on Monday, and you better believe I took my camera out. But I also made a really intense, intentional choice that I was going to spend part of the eclipse in totality, when it was safe to remove my glasses, of course, that I was just going to stand with my eyes and the moment to really let it sink in what was happening. So I'd like to encourage you today that if there are moments where you feel that urge to make a photograph, especially if it's because you're afraid, I'm not going to remember this later, maybe try putting the camera back down and just engaging with that moment one-on-one. And you might actually be surprised by how much you remember. Thank you.
Let's give her another hand. Oh. So how many of you were able to get a photograph during the eclipse? Okay, so how many of you just enjoyed the moment because your phone was in the house somewhere and you just, when you were able to, look at it safely, yeah, it was more immersive. Thank you, Kelsey. Well, guess what? It's time for snacks. At this time, we have a 10-minute break. And before we take this break, I would like for you to give a round of applause to the speakers from our first session, Benjamin Akande, Zachary Marsh, Katie. I want you to give them all a round of applause. And as we're interacting, make it immersive and talk with each other, okay? So at this time, you're free to go and roam around the building. Come back in about 10 minutes. Hello, hello. I tell you, reunions can really get us a little. I tell you, we just love talking. We are such social beings, aren't we? I feel like singing one of the little songs that I sing to my grandchildren, but you know. Okay. Passengers, the seatbelt light is on. Please take your seats and buckle up. I can tell you're having a good time. Well, I'm going to let you tell me by your applause. Go ahead. Excellent, excellent. How are the cookies? Yeah. Anybody have seconds? You know, no one does that. You know, no one does that. We have this little thing we do in our family that if you want seconds and it's in a gathering like this and you don't want to look like you really want seconds, you send the person that didn't get one to go get your cookie. So did anybody do a proxy for the cookie? You'll have an opportunity to revisit the table. Remember, you can always go over there when I'm talking. You're free to roam around the building. When our speakers get up, then you come back and buckle in on your seatbelt. We're excited to do the second part of Redhawk Talks. Yay! And in fact, our next speaker is going to tell us how we can change the world and make things different for people with differing abilities. Welcome to the Redhawk stage, Aurelia Valente.
So, as we've seen here today, everyone's journey is very different, right? My journey has been kind of weird and interesting. I've been an advocate, I've been a writer, a student, an educator, a researcher, and most importantly to me, a scientist. But my passion for my field in biology really comes down to two key areas: understanding biology and helping others to understand it. Now, as you may have noticed and are noticing, my situation is a little bit different than the other presenters up here. I'm walking with a cane, I'm sitting down, I have some little braces on my knees. The reason for that is complicated, but it really comes down to having some of those genetic conditions we heard about earlier. These are conditions that affect the way my brain works, the way my body works, the way I move and think and feel and operate. But just because I have these disabilities, it shouldn't prevent me from pursuing the things that I'm passionate about. And I'm definitely not the only disabled scientist. You may recognize a couple of people up on this board, like Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking, right? These are all people who have made incredible advancements that have changed the world for the better. Things that would have made the world a very different place if these people hadn't made the discoveries that they did. But we have a little bit of an inclusion problem in STEM. Even in biology, it can be really hard to keep diverse researchers around, which is very strange to me considering that the word biodiversity has the word diversity in the name. I mean, especially in biology, some of the research advancements we have wouldn't have existed without inclusion. In behavioral biology, which is what I study, mating systems were very biased in the way that they were studied until women entered the field. But there are a lot of barriers to access for all marginalized groups. For disabled people, while 27% of the public has some sort of disability, less than 5% of scientists under the age of 40 identify as having one. Less than 10% of scientists over the age of 40 identify as having one. And part of this is also a salary issue. Postdocs don't really get paid a lot, and sometimes it can drive you out of the field. When you're a young disabled person in higher education and other institutions that study STEM issues, you're pretty severely underpaid and underrepresented. And if you think grants are going to help, I wouldn't be so sure. Between 2008 and 2018, less than 2% of grant awardees from the National Institute of Health had a disability, and that number went down over those 10 years. But I think that part of the issue that we're having here is a misunderstanding about what disability means and ways to accommodate it. I break down my own disabilities into two categories. Category one is more static, disabilities with pretty standard everyday limitations and needs. Everybody has limitations and needs, right? Category two is a little more dynamic. It requires a little more flexibility because it might vary from day to day or moment to moment. But the accommodations can be pretty easy, pretty standard, and really don't require that much effort necessarily. Now, as a biologist, I have to go out into the field sometimes. And before I knew I had all of these kind of different things I was dealing with, it made it a lot harder to do what I wanted to do. So after I graduated college back in 2021, I went to do an internship in Peru. But because there was a lack of awareness, both on my side and on everyone else's side, it made it more challenging to be there. And it even led me to changing my own path, my own direction. Because if I couldn't get support out in the field, that could be dangerous, right? And I didn't even know that back then. But some of the things that would have helped me out there were pretty standard and predictable supports. Things like physical needs. I mean, a simple weight restriction probably would have helped me back then. Technological supports, extended testing times, clear breakdowns of assignments. These are all things that really don't require that much effort. And I would know. I taught high school students. I taught a lot of high school students with special education needs, accommodations. Now, I didn't quite give up because that's not the kind of person that I am. So when I joined Project Dragonfly, my first trip was to Baja to do research in the field. And I ended up actually getting the accommodations that I needed. I had that institutional support, social support, public support, support of my peers, my group leaders, my professors, and it completely changed the way that my trip went. Because I had a little more accommodation, I was able to have a really great time, I was able to be successful, and I got really excited about continuing that journey. My work with Project Dragonfly has focused a lot on accessibility and adaptability in biology, in communication, education, research. Because I was able to get that same accommodation and support and flexibility from my institution and from my project, I was able to do the work that I wanted to do. I was able to continue doing the work that I wanted to do. And it doesn't require much. A little more flexibility in scheduling, an alternative assignment here and there. I don't want to use my accommodations. I work really hard not to. But even though there are some organizations working to do some of this inclusive research, there's a long way to go. We really need support at all levels, institutional, public, health. If we want to make sure that people with disabilities are able to do the work that we want to do and be those life-changing figures that we have up there on that second slide, then we have to do it. We are all responsible for doing it. I'm starting my PhD in the fall, and I'm really excited about it. But I'm not going to be able to do that without support from everyone. Because I can handle my own needs. I can handle my symptoms. I can handle my disabilities. I've gotten really good at it. But without that awareness and support and understanding from the people around me, it makes it that much harder to do what I want to do. And besides, if we want to find more Stephen Hawkings, more Albert Einsteins, then we really have to work together to make it happen. Thank you so much.
That was a really interesting talk, wasn't it? It's a call to action for all of us to be more intentional and inclusive in respecting differing abilities. Thank you, Aurelia. Our next speaker is Vidusha Wisinga. And Vidusha is going to give us the relationship between proteins, pancakes, planets, and pizza. Okay, Vidusha, help us.
You don't know them. You don't see them, but they're everywhere, whispering, making secret plans, building armies with millions of soldiers. And when they decided to attack, they all attack at the same time. Well, I'm talking about millions and billions of bacteria around us. These bacteria, they're waiting for an opportunity to attack and make us sick. I believe you all have experienced being sick and taken medication in the form of a tablet. So these proteins and drugs are directed to unhealthy cells affected by bacteria and viruses to destroy them. This field of protein transport has been advanced rapidly over the past few decades. Yet, despite of this progress, many treatments still result unavoidable side effects. So let's take a moment to consider this whole process of protein transport similar to a pizza delivery. I mean, who wouldn't like a pizza delivered to your doorstep on a Friday night to wrap up a long week? Now think this protein or the drug as a pizza in this scenario. Just like this delivery person is entrusted with ensuring your pizza reaches to your home intact without being dry and soggy, the same level of care is necessary in transporting protein to their specific destination without compromising to their integrity, so that this protein can perform their intended function in these places. Therefore, a protein delivery system that can precisely, efficiently, and safely transport proteins to their specific target is really necessary in the pharmaceutical field. So what if I say nature itself has created a precise delivery system which can be found in plants, bacteria, and archaea? Today, I'm thrilled to take you on a journey into the world of cellular transport, a journey that unravels a secret of a remarkable pathway known as the twin arginine transport pathway, which is also we called as TAT pathway. In our lab, we study the TAT system in plants. Inside the plant leaves, there are tiny compartments known as chloroplast. And inside the chloroplast, there are pancake-like stacks known as thylakoids. And around each pancake, there's a cell membrane known as thylakoid membrane. So our twin arginine pathway resides inside the thylakoid membrane and is composed of 3 proteins named as HFC106, CpTAT-C, and TAR4. Together, these 3 proteins makes the doorway that transport proteins across the thylakoid membrane. Let's talk about proteins. We all know that the proteins are the fundamental building blocks in our life. Just like every object in this world possesses a unique shape that determines its function, these proteins also have a unique conformation and structure that is really crucial for their proper functioning. Speaking about our TAT pathway, it does not allow these unfolded proteins to cross the thylakoid membrane, while it's only allow this fully folded protein to cross the thylakoid membrane while keeping these proteins in their intact form. Another key fact about this TAT system is that at the heart of the TAT pathway, there lies the twin arginine motif that direct these proteins only to the TAT pathway. So referring to our pizza delivery scenario, it is like your home address that delivery person delivers your pizza only to your home. So why do we need to study this very complicated integrated transport pathway? I mean, what can we gain from that? Well, because of its precise delivery of protein by keeping them in their intact form, we can use this pathway as a proxy for various applications in the industry and in environmental applications. So speaking about the environmental application, in plants, the most of the proteins that are targeted to this TAT system are related to photosynthesis. We all know that the photosynthesis is the fundamental process that sustains the life on Earth. Therefore, by manipulating this pathway, we can generate genetically modified plants that have the ability to withstand environmental stressors such as salinity and drought, and also plants that have a higher crop yield. On the other hand, speaking about the industry, we can use this system as a proxy to develop advanced drug delivery system inside the human body. To conclude, this twin arginine transport pathway is a marvelous creation of the nature that invites us to unlock its secret for the betterment of science, industry, and our planet. Thank you.
Okay, here's the test. Who saw the pancakes? Ready? Who saw the pizza delivery? I know, you're getting hungry, aren't you? We have cookies. That's all we got. That's all we have. We only have cookies. All right, we have cookies and water. Thank you very much, Vidusha. Our next speaker has been announced as the Social Worker of the Year of the National Association of Social Workers in Ohio, the Ohio chapter. When you hear her, you will understand why. Shawnika Pope will bring to you a silent epidemic among Black girls and also offer some hope. Our next speaker, Shawnika Pope.
Last February 2023, I received a phone call inquiring about my availability to spend time at a local elementary school. On that particular day, I encountered so many familiar faces, yet the eyes, the voices, the disposition, the energy was remarkably different. One of the building administrators escorted me room to room as I informed the students and staff that I will remain in the building for the entire day. I spent moments discussing grief. I tried to normalize the thick emotions in the room. I spent extra time with grades 5 through 8 as they were visibly shaken. One by one, students took me up on my invitation to meet. And there was one question every student asked me that day. Miss Shanika, why did she do it? You see, I've spent countless hours in that building, building relationships with the students and staff. But on that particular visit, my sole purpose was to provide crisis support, as a former student died by suicide days before. Everyone in that building desperately tried to make sense of this little girl's decision to die by suicide. Suicide in Black girls has been on the rise for the last 2 decades. What's behind this alarming trend? So when we're talking about suicide, it's important to think about risk and protective factors. They're critical to this conversation. Risk factors contribute to the likelihood of negative outcomes, while protective factors help mitigate or eliminate risk. Schools represent a very critical protective factor for Black girls. Schools offer a range of resources and services that have the ability to address the unique needs of Black girls. Schools can offer leadership development opportunities, and these opportunities ensure that their skills and confidence is engaging so that students' mental health, Black girls' mental health is supported. Also, schools offer an ease of access to school-based mental health services. Yet, there's an additional crisis impacting Black girls. Disparities in suspension and discipline referrals is alarming. I invite you to take in this data. You will see highlighted in every region, Black girls are suspended by alarming rates. In every region? So are we saying universally Black girls are the most misbehaved in school settings? In Ohio, we represent the Midwest region. In this very region, Black girls are suspended 10 times more than any other age group. So as we unpack suicide rates, suspension rates for Black girls, we have to understand the intersection of race and gender. Kimberly Crenshaw, a legal scholar, offers intersectionality as a framework to help us understand how various pieces of our identity, such as race, gender, social class, interact to create unique experiences of privilege or oppression. Pushing Black girls out of schools interrupt this pathway to livelihood. Their mental health needs, their educational needs remain unaddressed. That little girl in that story, she was expelled from the very school I spent the day supporting. She had recently enrolled in a new school and was serving an out-of-school suspension when she died by suicide. I spent time that day with the behavior dean who was highly distressed as he shared, "I wish we found alternative ways to support her." He reflected on some of her behavior challenges, and he shared that perhaps the school and the adults failed her. You see, big behaviors that are disruptive are hard to hold, but what's important to understand, all behavior has meaning. What if Black girls had access to culturally informed and culturally responsive mental health and risk assessments? What if Black girls were referred to school-based mental health services rather than being suspended? What if Black girls were enrolled in mentoring programs that focused on positive identity development? What if schools were committed to investigating why these disparities even exist? The aftermath of that little girl's suicide had a rippling effect, and I experienced that in real time. By recognizing and addressing these factors, we ensure Black girls have access to prevention, intervention, and treatment options. By affirming Black girls deserve to become Black women, we honor and affirm their inherent worth. We honor and affirm their potential. We honor and affirm their right to a future full of possibilities. Thank you.
I'll give you this pause for reflection. Honoring and affirming with prevention, intervention, and treatment. Thank you, Shanika. Evan Saltz will continue this thought of how we can make schools a better place for learning and for meeting the needs of the whole person. He's going to talk to us about mindfulness in schools and share his personal narrative and perspective. Evan Saltz, give him a hand.
All right, so as a future school psychologist and mental health professional, there's a couple of things that I really focus on. And one of those things is providing students with the skills that they need to be successful in any situation they encounter. The next thing is it evidence-based? Is what I'm providing my students actually going to affect them based on good research? It's something that I focus on, and mindfulness is one of those practices that can really help us achieve that. Mindfulness practices and activities have been shown to increase GPA, decrease anxiety, and increase teacher-student relations. So, as this is a talk about mindfulness, I invite you all to engage with me for a minute of practice. So, if we can all start by closing our eyes, taking a big, deep breath, and then just beginning to find the breath as it comes. Notice if you have any emotions present. If you're happy, sad, anxious. And now, if you have any thoughts, if they pop into your head, just notice them. All right. Thank you for engaging with that. So, I think it's important to note that since mindfulness has become just so popular over these last few years, I felt it needed to be important to define it so we kind of know where I'm coming from with this. So, we can look at mindfulness as a set of skills, and that's developed through practices much like the one we just did, or if not, through something similar. And it focuses on meta-attention. And what does meta-attention mean? Meta-attention is that process of looking at thoughts. When I ask you to look at a thought when it arises, that is the process of meta-attention. And this can be very, very significant. So I would like you all to imagine you are back in high school. I know, it's not great, but just imagine you're walking through a hallway, you smell that unmistakable floor cleaner that just permeates throughout the school, and you're walking down, maybe you're going to lunch or something, and you walk by your science classroom. And you think to yourself, oh my God, I have a test in 2 days and I haven't started studying yet. And you just get this horrible pit in your stomach and you get a chill down your spine, and you think, oh my God, I'm gonna fail this test. I'm absolutely gonna fail this test. And because I'm gonna fail this test, I'm not gonna get in that school I wanna get into. And because I can't get in the school I wanna get into, I'm not gonna get the job I want. And because of that, I'm gonna end up a complete failure, a waste of space. So how many of you have ever had something like this happen to you before? I'm gonna raise my hand. This happens to me pretty frequently. So this is a process known as rumination, and it is one of the many things that mindfulness can actually help us with. So when we're talking about mindfulness interventions, we can almost look at it as a toolkit. Look at this, it's beautiful, I made it myself. And so if we're looking at this toolkit, let's go back to the meditation that I brought you through. And if we're looking at a student who's beginning to ruminate on their thoughts, what happens? It's that first thought. It's that I'm going to fail my test. And that thought brings us down this dark path until we can't move, we're debilitated. That's the last thing I want for my students. So with that mindful practice, what I'm teaching them is to look at thoughts as if they're just objects. And because they're just objects, I don't need to follow down that path because it's not as real as I imagine. Next is the process of looking at your emotions. When you feel that, you can just step away. You have the ability now to just look at it. And the funny thing is, once you're just looking at it, it begins to fade. But here's the last thing. It doesn't always fade. Sometimes your heart rate is still going and you just feel a little bit out of control. So that's why we have some breathing exercises to go with it that help us slow down our heart rate and slow down and relax the central nervous system. So some of you may be questioning, like, what's the issue? Well, this sounds great. There's clearly a lot here that we can use, but in fact, there's so much out there that I worry that we can become paralyzed. So mindfulness is it's a good skill, it's a good way to help students, but in all of this information, I'm afraid that sometimes we lose what the core tenets are, and we will engage in providing students with activities that don't really follow data-based practices and also focus too heavily on prompts. For some of these, the practice could not be done without the colorful picture. I want my students to be able to succeed in any scenario, with a prompt or without. So, what can we do as teachers, school staff, members of the community? Well, it's important to note that we need to be consistent with our mindfulness-based practices if we're going to do them. In fact, research has shown that mindfulness-based practices need a lot of time and commitment. If we do this intermittently, we may not get the long-term effects that can really support our students. We need to focus on providing these interventions consistently and over the course of several months, because it takes time to build these skills. We need to sharpen our tools, if you will. And because of that, any of you can support students in building good mindfulness-based practices through interventions, through even things online, and we can all create a better future for our students in that way. Mindfulness-based practices have helped me immensely in my own life, and I have very strong opinions that it can help many students as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Evan, for reminding us that consistent, sustained space practice improves our performance. Now, I don't know about you, but I like that colorful bingo thing, and we can't use that now. But that was really colorful. I got to put away my colorful bingo cards. Thank you. Our next speaker is fresh off the 3-minute thesis competition and the Midwestern Association. And it's so amazing. The Department of Psychology is well represented. And so we have Catherine Allstadt, who is going to provide for us a little short talk, and be prepared. She's from the Department of Psychology, just like Evan. You will have to be engaged. Everyone that is going to participate, raise your hand. Okay, you just psychoanalyze that? Okay, I got you. All righty. Catherine Allstadt.
Hello, thank you for coming. I would like to start us off with just a little bit of audience participation. I know. Who judges people here? It's okay, hands up. I saw you before. It's okay, I do it all the time, and I know she said I'm in the Department of Psychology, but I'm not gonna chastise you for judging others. We do it all the time. But how do we judge others? What are some of the attributes that you think of when you're making those judgments of others? Do you judge them on if they're friendly, if they're generous, if they're driven, and if they're hardworking? Or maybe you judge them if they're mean, if they're selfish, if they're unambitious, or if they're lazy. And what all of these attributes have in common is that they can be boiled down to 2 categories: warmth and competence. And that's the first concept that I'd like to discuss today. It's called the stereotype content model. And it says that our perceptions of others can be boiled down to 2 categories: their warmth and their competence. Warmth first asks about intentions. Do they have good or bad intentions towards me? Competence asks about ability. Can they act on those good or bad intentions? Relating back to my last slide, examples of warmth are friendly and generous, or mean and selfish. Examples of competence are driven and hardworking, or unambitious and lazy. It's worth noting that past research has shown that we value perceptions of warmth far more than perceptions of competence when making judgments of others. Not only does the stereotype content model show how we can judge others based on warmth and competence, but the bias map, which stands for the behavior from intergroup, effect, and stereotypes map, shows how we can act on those perceptions of warmth and competence and how we treat people based on those perceptions. First, we have a blank diagram of the stereotype content model, with competence being on our horizontal x-axis and warmth being on our vertical y-axis. Based on those perceptions of warmth and competence, that determines where someone falls on this map. Here, we have the bias map. The blue arrows show how we behave towards someone based on where they fall, and the red arrows show the emotions that we feel towards that person. Not only do the stereotype content model and the bias map show how we behave towards other people based on our perceptions of warmth and competence, but those perceptions can also be applied to non-human entities. And that's the second concept that I'd like to discuss with you all today. And that is anthropomorphism. That is ascribing human qualities to non-human things or entities. Past work has found that when participants anthropomorphize a planet via poster drawings, this increases their connection to nature and their pro-environmental behavioral intentions. And this picture right here on your right-hand side is actually a real-life poster drawing from one of the participants in that study about 10 years ago. In our lab, we examined the pets as ambassadors hypothesis, which says that pet relationships can promote pro-environmentalism. In their study, they found that people who view their pets as possessing stronger emotional experiences or warmth showed greater pro-environmentalism through their conservation beliefs and behavioral intentions. However, perceptions of pet agency or competence did not. This highlights my earlier point about how we value perceptions of warmth far more than perceptions of competence when making those judgments. For the present study that I'll be discussing today, we were wondering if the pets as ambassadors hypothesis could be extended a step further. While this shows how pet relationships can promote pro-environmentalism, we're wondering if our perceptions of the planet itself along those dimensions of warmth and competence can be used to promote pro-environmentalism. And that's what we're doing today. We're manipulating those perceptions. To do this, my advisor and I constructed a fictitious passage, just a couple paragraphs long, featuring an interview by a Princeton professor of earth sciences. This was used to establish some credibility within our participants and make our study a little more believable. For this, they were all the same except for the last two paragraphs, which I will show on the next slide and give you all just a second to read them. They could have been in one of four possible conditions with the wording changed between each of those four conditions. The second to last paragraph is shown here. Participants either read the words in red, which depicted the planet as warm and caring and friendly, or the words in blue, which depicted the planet as cold and mean. Then, in our last paragraph, participants either read the words in purple, which depict the planet as competent and ambitious, or the words in dark blue, depicting the planet as incompetent and lazy. So they read one of four variations of this. Afterwards, we assess their emotions like pity, admiration, contempt, and envy, corresponding to red arrows, and their behavioral intentions like protecting nature or harming nature, corresponding to the blue arrows. We also assess several pro-environmental outcome measures. This includes pro-environmental beliefs, empathy towards nature, and behavioral intentions. Through a statistical procedure called a multiple regression, we found that feelings of admiration and pity predicted greater sustainability outcomes through their behavioral intentions, nature empathy, and pro-environmental beliefs, but feelings of contempt and envy did not. What this means is that warmth-driven emotions of admiration and pity predicted these outcomes regardless of the perceived competence level of the planet. This again highlights my earlier point about how we value perceptions of warmth far more than perceptions of competence. So this mirrors past research in the field. This also supports the need for emotion-based climate change awareness campaigns, as that has shown to increase people's nature empathy and pro-environmental behavioral intentions rather than just presenting cold, hard facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So we value warmth over competence. Warmth over confidence. It reminds me of some of the commercials that we see online today. Nowadays, have you noticed the ones with the pharmaceuticals, how they'll have this whatever the little ailment is, if it's a cold, and then it gives a nice little character, and he has feelings, and he doesn't want to be put out of your system, and it does that. And then notice all the commercials that they'll have about the earth and how the earth has eyes and arms and legs, just enough to scare you. No, I'm just kidding. But yes, this is so important to remember that as creatures, human beings, we are attracted to warmth. Our last speaker, Ademi Fagite, is going to entertain us with his personal journey and use the artistry of language to engage us with his personal experience. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm a creative writer, and my major medium of passing down knowledge is through writing. This afternoon, I want to start with a poem I wrote titled, "It is September, and I Remember." It is September, and I remember. Dry air permeates the peaceful outdoor ambience, a subtle recall of what home feels like. Home is a field of corn infested by stem borers. At home, the birds no longer sing like birds, and the fish no longer listen and obey the call of the waters. At home, our fathers no longer know the taste of kola nut. They wake up to the song of lamentation. The gold has grown dim. The pure gold is changed. At home, our mothers wake to the hungry cry of children with inflamed patches of darkened skin, brittle hair falling from their skulls, helpless as they feed them from last night's hakamu. No protein to supplement it. It is September, and the memory of home punctuates my head. The image of floating bodies materializes like a trance. Thank you, Nemozin. But I remember, yes, I didn't forget how I expressed Chijioke's father's grief through the body of language, how I preserved his memory in modernized parchment. It is September, and I remember the movement that would have broken the fetters of corrupt institutions, how the youth swarmed the streets of my motherland, demanding for change. It is September, and I remember. Yes, I remember. This poem speaks to the heart-wrenching decision to flee one's homeland when the very essence of home becomes a perilous battleground. It speaks of the decapitating condition of the speaker's country. My own journey from Nigeria to the United States for an MFA in creative writing echoes the sentiment. Leaving behind a family and a life filled with both love and responsibilities, I embarked on a quest not just for career advancement, but for a place to call home, a sanctuary where I could freely express my passion for writing, a dream often dismissed in my homeland. Home by Wasan Shire starts with the powerful line, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark." This signifies that there is always a reason for living. Living meant abandoning my ailing father in the care of my mother and two younger siblings, a reality that weighed on me heavily. In Nigeria, I was a pillar for my mother, assisting in caring for my father. The party shifted this burden solely onto our shoulders as my siblings were at school. My departure was tinged with mixture of guilt and resolve, not the excitement commonly associated with new beginnings. As my flight took off, the image of my father, once a beacon of joy and pride, now diminished by illness, haunted me. Of which I must let you all know this afternoon. He died 2 weeks ago on Easter Sunday. I asked myself after I heard of his demise, was I selfish to have left him? And probably if I was there, probably I could have saved him. This journey was about pursuing a dream that almost felt almost unreachable from where I stood. A dream to write, to carve my identity through words. In Nigeria, where the arts are often undervalued, declaring oneself a writer is met with skepticism, if not outright disdain. I recall a moment when, upon revealing my profession as a writer, I was met with silence, a clear dismissal of my passion. Yet it was this passion for writing, this dream of making an impact through my words, that fueled my departure. My transition was far from easy. Faced with a new culture, I grappled with isolation, discrimination, and the realization that the concept of home transcends physical borders. Encounters that challenged my identity and worth only fueled my determination to redefine home on my own terms. A moment that profoundly impacted me and left me wrestling with deep-seated emotions for months involved a seemingly mundane task, reaching out to the Social Security office to make inquiry about my Social Security number. Upon hearing my accent, the man on the other end of the call not only figured out my Nigerian heritage, but what would have come up as easily as finding out about my Social Security number, it gave me a rather offensive request. Go back to your home country and fix it. Referencing the political struggle in Nigeria, actually. Despite the kernel of truth in his words, this experience left me feeling deeply wounded and humiliated. I wished I could have taught him at that moment the impermanence of home, which means that home can be anywhere. Another poignant episode that highlighted the complexity of belonging and the concept of home occurred when I assisted a professor in packing up her life as she prepared to leave the country. While we were packing, she abruptly asked, "Where is home to you?" It was an intelligent question. I answered, "Nigeria." It was a painful sight to see someone who has spent more than a decade in academia being forced to return to their home country due to the serious illness of their parents. This experience was a reminder that our achievements in life are temporary, and our roots will always call us back no matter how far we go. This experience highlighted the importance of home as part of our identity that remains with us regardless of where life takes us. Home, I have come to realize, is not confined by geography, but is a mosaic of memories, relationships, and the values we hold dear. It is a place where our true selves can flourish, unfettered by fear or prejudice. After my father's demise, I found comfort in the arms of my lover, friends, family, the creative writing department, and my wonderful professors. The notion of home extends beyond personal narrative. It encompasses the global plight of immigrants and the displaced who seek refuge and dignity in unfamiliar lands. It reminds us of the universal quest for belonging and acceptance in a world marred by division. It is our duty to build a world where every person, regardless of where they come from or how they speak, can find a place to belong. A world where home is not just a word, but a sanctuary of love, understanding, and unity. In the end, home is just more than a physical space. It is a feeling of belonging, a nest for the human spirit to soar, and a foundation on which we build our dreams and forge our destinies. Thank you.
Let's give him another hand. For the past hour, this room has been home to our audience and to our speakers. And at this time, I'd like to give you another opportunity for a round of applause as I call their names, and please come to the stage. Catherine Stallhut, Benjamin Akande, Zachary Marsh, Abubakar Bala, Evelyn Okorafo, Kelsey Nolan, Aurelia Valente, Vidusha Wisinka, Shanika Pope, Evan Saltz, Catherine Allstat, Adafimi Fagite. Miami University, in front of you are your illustrious peers, colleagues, researchers, and outstanding Miamians. Let's give them another hand. Before we finish, we want to also give special thanks to Acacia Duncan, Kim Goldsmith, and Blythe Coons of Articulation Incorporated. Tyler Moore, the media, making sure that our speakers were captured, and he's also the man in charge of editing. Megan Davison, who's assistant to the dean and manager of the Graduate Student Services. Annie Abbey and Isaac B. Namoa of the Graduate Assistants. We want to thank Dean Crowder for being here with us. And last but not least, we want to thank all of you for taking the time to spend your afternoons with us and making this room home so that you can enjoy all of these wonderful speakers. Give yourself a hand. At this time, I'm going to relinquish the mic to Acacia in case she says no. She says no. So I will tell you this. There are some more cookies back there. If you have proxy friends that would pick up some if you're on your second or third, there's water. And of course, please take time to personally congratulate all of our speakers who've done a marvelous job. Thank you and have a great afternoon.